I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the Arroyo Currents show. This is a special show that we're doing on the Arroyo Seco Canyon project. And I'm going to start by giving an overview of what's going on. And this is the agenda for this evening's discussion on the Pasadena's Arroyo Seco Canyon project. And generally, Pasadena's water program as it's moving forward in the future, although concentrating pretty much on the Arroyo Canyon project, because it looks like that project's going to be moving very quickly through the process. And while they haven't released the full environmental impact report for the program, they're talking about having a hearing to approve the environmental impact report by a hearing officer on January 6th. So we're very concerned that this massive document is going to be released during the middle of the holidays, and people won't have the opportunity to really review it fully. We're going to begin with just some greetings and introductions, and then I'm going to provide an overview of the Arroyo Seco Canyon and what our concerns are about the project. That will be followed by Angel Pinedo, who is has been an instructor at Cal State Fullerton in biology, and he's a technical advisor to the Arroyo Seco Foundation, and has done a lot of review of the biological issues involved in the project, as well as what the response of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has been to the draft environmental impact report. And then following that, we're going to have some comments from Hugh Bowles, who's a longtime activist in the Arroyo Seco and Ha'amungna, has been around a long time raising important issues with regard to Ha'amungna. And he reminded me he was the winner of the 2013 Arroyo Verde Award for Environmental Activists, Best Environmental Activist. We're giving a bunch of those awards on Tuesday evening at 5 o'clock. If you'd like to tune in at that time, we have a bunch of people that we're going to be honoring for their very important contributions to stewardship and leadership with regard to the Arroyo Seco. A lot of good things have been going on in the Arroyo Seco this year. I have to say, it's really surprising how much has really gotten done. And then following Hugh, Hugh kind of knows, because he lives right there on the edge of the Arroyo, right above the area where the spreading basins are going to be if the Arroyo Seco Canyon project moves ahead. And then after that, we're going to hear from Ken Kules, who is an engineer, a water resources engineer who worked with the Metropolitan Water District for 21 years and has really studied very carefully the relationship between the project, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project, and the declining Raymond Basin, which is of great concern. Following that, we hope that will leave plenty of time for questions and discussions. We'd like to try to stay around an hour for it. If necessary, we can go over after that, but I think it's best to have a good tight schedule and try to keep it around an hour. So let's begin with why is Ha'amungna so important to the Arroyo Seco. It really is critical because it's Ha'amungna and the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is located in Ha'amungna Watershed Park near the mouth of the Arroyo, right at the critical junction where the mountain stream enters the urban Arroyo on its way to the Los Angeles River. And Ha'amungna is unique. It's an alluvial canyon. It's right at the base of the mountains. And most alluvial canyons that have these kind of environmental values have been paved over and degraded over the years. So there's really very few of these coastal alluvial canyons like Ha'amungna left. It has 5 unique habitat zones in the immediate area, a relatively small area there of 200 acres, and it's home to several endangered and threatened species. The most recent was a pair of least-bill's vireo was found, a mating pair of least-bill's vireo was found there in the spring, which is a very significant development in terms of endangered species enforcement. This is really our region's greatest natural treasure, vital for water resources, habitat, wildlife, and nature appreciation as well. and it's the gateway to the San Gabriel Mountains and the connecting link to the Los Angeles River. So it just is really an extremely important treasure. So having said that, I want you to take a look at the map of Haamungna going from where it enters, comes out of the mountain watershed and goes down to Devil's Gate Dam, which is a stretch of about a mile going on. So knowing that this is the most precious habitat in our region, take a look at what's going on with increasing utilitarian uses in the Haamungna Basin. So on the left, you can see the spreading basins that are already there, the 13 spreading basins, 14 spreading basins if you count Johnson Field, that have been there for many years. And then also you can see up at the top, you can see the new basins that will be part of the Arroyo Seco Canyon project. On the right, the graphic on the right, you see the county maintenance zone, which has been defined by their sediment management program, which they are currently in the middle of. They're about halfway done with their excavation program with regard to sediment management. They've removed about 800,000 or 900,000 cubic yards of sediment from the basin, and they're going to remove a similar amount in the next 2 years. But they're going to continue to knock down precious habitat in the middle of the basin after they finish their initial excavation program. They're going to come in every year and they're going to remove vegetation in the area that's most of the area that's marked there in yellow. So if you put it all together, I think the picture is pretty clear that our region's most precious environmental habitat zone is not being treated as if it's the most precious environmental habitat zone. Now, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is a project that it really is an attempt by the city of Pasadena to increase the amount of water it diverts from the Arroyo Seco stream for municipal purposes, as well as it's pumping from the Raymond groundwater basin. So they're going to do both. They're going to take more water out of the stream and they're going to take more water out of the groundwater basin. They're going to get a license because they're taking some water out of the stream and putting it in the spreading basins. They're going to get a license to pump more water out of the groundwater basin. And Ken Kules in particular is going to have a more detailed examination of what that means and whether that's good for the groundwater basin or not. I think that we can say preliminarily, Pasadena can say that it's exercising its full water rights, but it's also going to lead to a severe decline or a continuing decline in the groundwater basin beneath Pasadena, that is the Raymond Basin. So the Arroyo Seco Canyon project includes two major elements. One is a dam and diversion replacement, and the second is the expansion of the spreading basins at the mouth of the Arroyo and Haamungna Watershed Park. Basically, they're going to move into the area where the old JPL East parking lot was, and they're going to take that. JPL abandoned it several years ago. They're going to take that stretch and they're going to expand the spreading basins in that area in order to have the capacity to put some more water into the ground and thereby get the capacity to pump even more water out of the groundwater basin. So the environmental impact report for the project was posted last summer for public review. The final environmental EIR, environmental impact report, is scheduled to be released, well, at any time. We don't know when, but they seem to be intent with moving ahead with a hearing for approval of the environmental impact report and of the conditional use that is necessary for the project on January 6th, which is disappointing if they do that, because it's going to be very difficult for people to really be able to review the environmental impact report, the final environmental impact report, fully if we don't have adequate time to do so. And of course, during the holidays, it's going to be very difficult to do that. So we hope that they're not going to sneak it through. This is a process, really, even though the project has been going on for a long time, and we'll get into that in just a second here. We'll show you the history of the project. Even though that's the case, the reality is it's had very little public attention in the last year. There was a very small scoping meeting over a year ago in November. There have been a few kind of very quick discussions before the Environmental Advisory Commission and the Pasadena Municipal Services Committee of the City Council, but there's been very little public input really into the project. So here is the, hang on here just a second. Here is the history of the project, really. The initial plan was developed by the Arroyo Seco Foundation together with the engineering firm CDM Smith way back in 2008. And a large part of the program was to get certain environmental improvements. Let me go here, and began way back, 12 years ago, really. And the initial purpose of it really was to enhance environmental issues and to integrate the environmental issues, protecting fish and wildlife in the area, with the water resources development. Pasadena's system of diverting water from the stream traditionally has chopped up a lot of fish in it. And so we wanted to eliminate that. And that was an important part of the process. Then the next year in 2009, the station fire hit, and there were floods for the next 2 years after that. So the combination of those two events, the station fire, which burnt pretty much all of the upper mountain watershed of the Arroyo Seco, and then the two floods that came after that, brought a lot of sediment into the basin, but it also destroyed or seriously damaged the conditions for the water diversion structure that the city of Pasadena uses in order to take water for municipal purposes. In 2011, the California Integrated Water Resources Fund of the Department of Water Resources provided the Arroyo Seco Foundation with a grant of $3.3 million in order to pursue the environmental benefits associated with the project. Pasadena was going to lead the project and took the $3.3 million and started spending it. And we worked with the city of Pasadena for several years, putting forward the program, the design of the program, and issuing eventually a negative declaration with regard to the program, which was approved by the city council in 2015. However, after the negative declaration was approved by the city council, a lawsuit was filed by the Spirit of the Sage Council, which said that the negative declaration hadn't been adequate in evaluating some of the environmental impact of the project. And so the Spirit of the Sage Council filed their lawsuit because of the timing on the state grant. It was supposed to be spent by 2015. Pasadena had to forfeit the money, and that money was lost for the environmental benefits. And at that point, the Pasadena Water and Power Department began excluding the Arroyo Seco Foundation from participation in the program. In 2017, Judge Richard Florin ruled that the Pasadena Water and Power Department must do a full environmental impact report to consider impacts on downstream habitat and the fish and wildlife that would be downstream from the project. And so at that time, Pasadena had to pull back, kind of redesign the project to some extent, and initiate a full environmental impact report. And that's what is being reviewed now. We've seen the draft environmental impact report. It was released after an initial scoping meeting that was held more than a year ago in November that had a handful of people at it, which has been the only public meeting truly with regard to this project. In 2020, the draft environmental impact report was released. The public comments closed at the end of June of the summer, and we discovered that all of the environmental amenities that we had hoped would be in the project were basically taken out of the project and are not being considered at all. So we're very disappointed by that fact itself. There's now talk that they are going to push ahead, that Water and Power Department is going to push ahead with a public hearing on the conditional use permit for the project and the environmental impact report, refer to a hearing officer. And apparently the Water and Power Department feels that the hearing officer can approve the EIR on his own, which is something that we will not accept. Eventually, it'll get either through direct action, through council action, calling it up, which the council certainly should call it up because it's an issue of great importance. And the council shouldn't be deferring key issues like this to zoning officers. And if they do go ahead with that process, we will appeal it through to the city council anyway. So that's why we have to have this meeting tonight on something of an urgency basis, because there hasn't been a full and open process with regard to this. And we believe that Water and Power is doing its best to basically sneak the project through. Wanted to talk a little bit about the water cycle because it's so important for people to understand when we talk about water resources in Ha'amungna and the relationship, how the water cycle really works and how this is all part of the water cycle and how we receive water. Rainfall falls on the ground, it percolates into the ground, percolates into the groundwater basin. And that water that percolates into the groundwater basin or comes directly from the stream flow has been providing about 35% of Pasadena's water in recent decades. And it used to provide even more than that. And some of the other local pumpers, it provides even more than that for some of the other local pumpers, more like 50% of their local water. So the water that's in that groundwater basin below us, that bowl of sand and gravel, of alluvial sand and gravel that is below us, that water is being used for municipal purposes. And that water is rapidly declining. This is the Raymond Basin. It gives you, the map gives you a sense of what's in the Raymond Basin. And you can see that on the northwest, it extends up into La Cañada and La Crescenta. It's right at the foothills there. And then you see Northwest Pasadena is included in Ha'amungna, is in what's called the Monk Hill subbasin, which is part of the Raymond Basin. And there's three sub areas or subbasins, and one is the Monk Hill sub area. The second is the Pasadena sub area, which is somewhat larger. And then there's the Santa Anita sub area on the east side of the Raymond Basin. So basically, the Raymond Basin is bound on the south by the Raymond Fault or dike, which is an earthquake fault basically that moves through the area, basically along the southern border of Pasadena and kind of out along Huntington Drive, out towards Santa Anita and the racetrack, and then up into the mountains and into Santa Anita Canyon. So that's basically the 40 square mile Raymond Basin. And you can see there that there's 16 pumpers that have water rights in the Raymond Basin in order to pump water in the Raymond Basin. And the footprint of the canyon project is shown here. And you can see, if you look closely for the black outlined area in Ha'amungna, that's Ha'amungna, where it says City of Pasadena there, that's Ha'amungna. And then Jet Propulsion Laboratory is the big complex of buildings right at the mouth of the arroyo as the canyon comes out of the mountains. And so you can see there, and then the green line going across is the boundary of the Angeles National Forest. So the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is contained within land that is owned by the City of Pasadena and that is used for water rights by the City of Pasadena. And you can see the black outline at the top. That's where the dam and diversion structure is going to go. That will be part of the improvements of the Arroyo Seco Canyon project if it moves ahead. And then they're also going to line part of the channel below the diversion structure as it comes into the Ha'amungna area. Candidly, we're trying to get concrete out of the Arroyo Seco channel, but Pasadena Water and Power is going to line the channel below the diversion structure. And they're also going to expand the spreading basins in the former JPL East parking lot. Now, here we have this is the area, this is what they call Area 3, which was based on their original plan from, 5 to 8 years ago. And that plan had 3 different areas. They've they've neglected. They're not going to do anything in Area 1, which is some old facilities that Pasadena has put in the past that are basically simply attractive nuisances at this point and don't serve a useful purpose. But Pasadena is going to leave them in the stream zone. They call it the Headworks facility. And originally that was to be taken out. But when they redrafted the program for the full environmental impact report, they took that part out of the project. So this is area 2 is the dam and diversion structure, which we talked about just a second ago. And now this is area 3. This is largely the old JPL parking lot. And so at the top of the JPL parking lot, there is going to be some parking for recreational users in the Arroyo Seco, so maybe 50 to 75 cars at the top of the basin, and there will be a bathroom that will be a public use bathroom that will be put in there. And then the pink squares that are rectangles, oblongs that you see there are where the spreading basins are going to be increased so that they can take more water in from the stream and put it into the groundwater basin. So you can see that it's pretty total. Now, I remember when they put in the JPL parking lot in the late 80s, and they said, oh, the parking lot's only going to be there for 3 years, and then we're going to return it to habitat because it's such an important zone for habitat. So here we are 33 years later, and we see what they're actually going to do. So it's kind of, for someone who really cares about the Arroyo, it hurts, frankly, to see, the steady progression of utilitarian uses which are destroying the natural character of the Arroyo Seco, our greatest environmental treasure. So this slide deals with what's wrong with the Arroyo Seco Canyon project. And I'm just going to make some quick shots here and, that really deserve fuller review and treatment, but some points that really Pasadena Water and Power ought to be answering to, but they're not. And we'll see whether their environmental impact report does respond to some of these concerns. The first is that they have failed to respond to the judge's order from 2017, which told them that they had to thoroughly evaluate the impacts on downstream habitat. They didn't do that, not in the draft environmental impact report. They basically just said, oh, the county's below us. The county will take care of it. And they have a somewhat contradictory statement about how, well, the water's going to kind of seep into the basin and it's not going to affect habitat, and yet there's no water they're saying that the water that gets past their spreading ponds is lost. So it's kind of a contradictory statement, but basically they do not appropriately respond to the order that the judge gave them to thoroughly evaluate the effects on downstream habitat. It discards without study more environmentally superior alternatives. And I think the most environmentally sensitive alternative was developed by Philip Williams and Associates, an engineering firm in 2000, which called for using a natural stream zone in order to percolate the water into the ground rather than using rather sterile basins, spreading basins. So they dismiss the impacts on fish, habitat, and wildlife as insignificant. In fact, they say there's no fish in the Arroyo. Well, if that's the case, that's the first time in several million years that there are not fish in the Arroyo. And probably Water and Power has something to do with that. They don't follow the principles of integrated water resources management. It'll aggravate the decline of the Monk Hill Basin. It fails to consider the impact on native fish and impacted species. They conducted, as a mark of their good faith, they conducted their fish study on October 14th, 2019. Think about that. That's exactly the driest time of the year. And in fact, that was one of the driest days in 2019. So you don't go out looking for fish on the driest day of the year if you want to find any. Beyond that, California Fish and Game Code requires environmental flow for steelhead and all fish and aquatic species. There's none provided in the program. It relies on inefficient spreading basins. It has a devastating impact on groundwater levels, and it fails to evaluate the impacts of climate change. Now, Ken Kules is going to go into this, and he's going to talk about the Monk Hill Basin, and he's going to show you the decline in recent years in the Monk Hill Basin and what concern that's a great concern. Here's the the main basin.
Excuse me, Tim, excuse me. You just mentioned Ken Kules. He cannot get in. For some reason, he doesn't have the ID. Is there something that you can do to get him into this meeting? Because if he's not in the meeting, he can't give a presentation.
Thank you for that, Maury. I'm gonna get Angel Pinedo started, and then I'll let him in. But I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. This is the Raymond Basin, and you know this is a basin that has had an adjudication and has been advertising for 80 years that it had established a sustainable use program, a sustainable management program for the basin, and yet you see there has been a steady decline in the groundwater basin in a precipitous fashion that is destroying the long-term viability of the basin. It's totally irresponsible and counterproductive, and it's going to be a terrible legacy to leave future generations. Now, California has a policy now. California is talking about, Governor Newsom has waded in and has a call for a resilient water policy. And what does he mean by resilient? Well, resilient is the ability to cope with more extreme droughts and floods, rising temperatures, declining fish populations, over-reliance on groundwater, and other challenges. Well, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project doesn't do that. And neither does Pasadena's bigger plan for water resources for the future. California has set up a sustainable groundwater management program, but apparently they're only doing it for agricultural basins because they assume that basins that already have adjudications like the Raymond Basin are being well managed. But as that chart showed you, they're not being well managed. What we have is an overdrafted basin. Pasadena has had a sustainable groundwater plan for 80 years, but it's ignored the plan, as this chart shows very clearly. This to anyone who knows anything about water, this is an extremely distressing chart. And look at 1940 and see what the level was, and that's when they established the plan, the adjudication for sustainable yield and the safe yield, they called it in the Raymond Basin. They were going to match extractions with natural inflow into the system, and instead what they've done is the decline has considered almost as precipitously as it was in the 30s and 40s. Now, if this was a serious problem in 1930 and 1940 that the city really stepped out on and took leadership in establishing a management plan for the future, if it was a serious problem then, why isn't it a serious problem now? And yet Pasadena is ignoring it. The well is running dry. So Pasadena has been using cheap groundwater for many decades, but now that groundwater is disappearing rapidly. The imported sources are much more costly and increasingly unreliable, and the water development needs to be responsive and incorporate environmental stewardship as well with everything they do. So we want you to get involved. We hope you will attend the public hearing in January. Let your council know that this is important to you. And there is a better way to do this. And that way is to develop a resilient water future for Pasadena, to let the river flow and heal the basin. We need to heal that Raymond Basin and bring it back with a real resilient water program. Now, for complete information about the Arroyo Seco Canyon project and Pasadena's water crisis, you can go to this page on our webpage, the watercrisis.htm page on the www.arroyoseco.org page, and there's complete information, more than you'd want to know, about the various aspects of this program. And you can pick and choose what's of interest to you, but there's lots of information here that'll make you well informed, as good citizens should be, with regard to water. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Angel Pinedo, who's going to talk about biology and other negative impacts of the Arroyo Seco Canyon project.
Fantastic. Hi, my name is Angel Pinedo. I'm an environmental educator for the Arroyo Seco Foundation. I've been cooped in this house for a long time, as all of us, or most of us. I take care of my elderly folks, so I have not been out in the field in quite some time. So forgive me if I take a little bit of luxury and just bring a little bit of the outdoors for here in the indoors. It's been a while since I've worn this outside, so I get to wear it on camera. Okay, let me get started here. Here are some aerial photographs that we got from a friend who used his drone to get some photos of the Arroyo Seco and Cajamonga Park right above. This is right near Devil's Gate Dam, the dam being over here on this side on the top of the screen. And this is the demolition project that you saw all those trucks coming in and out, taking sediment away. Here is just another, you saw this earlier with Tim, the county maintenance zone takes up a huge part of the park, as well as the new basin project being run by the Arroyo Seco project, Canyon Project. Here are the spreading basins that are not even used. They were intended to take water, to divert water away from the Arroyo Seco, and followed by for city use. The new plan now from the Arroyo Seco Canyon Project is to take more water from them and to expand these spreading basins. It's a good idea to see an actual image and photograph of what this project looks like, and that it's planning to be extended. So the Arroyo Seco Canyon Project, Pasadena Water and Power plans to divert water for the Cajamonga Watershed Park and the Arroyo Seco for city purposes. Area 2 in the plan is for dam and diversion replacement. There is a dam there right now. It is planning to replace those with a much more sophisticated system. Area 3 is the expansion of the spreading basins, and so that the city can take about 60 to 80% of this water for city use. These are the existing conditions for the diversion wear. This is what they plan to do, a much more extended, complicated project. Here are the existing conditions for the spreading basins. There are 7 spreading basins currently. They plan to expand them much larger. There is a measurement used called cubic feet per second that is used a lot in these studies. Just so we know, because on the next screen I'll talk about this a little more, 1 cubic foot per second is equivalent to 7.5 gallons at any particular point in 1 second. Or 1 CFS is equivalent to 448.8 gallons of flowing water per minute.
Angel, you muted yourself.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I made a mistake.
That's okay.
There. Okay, you're back.
All right, I'm back. All right. How dare you try to silence me, Tim?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
So Pasadena Water and Power wants to take 25 CFS or 11K gallons of water a minute, when the average in the Arroyo Seco in general is 7 CFS, and in dry seasons it's 2. Pasadena Water and Power has not indicated any plan for how much they want to take or even the timing of when they plan to take that water in the draft environmental impact statement. Here is a graph from the USGS, particularly a temporal graph showing how much available water is in there in CFS. We can see that in January 2020 and February 2020, CFS was just a little bit above 1. Yes, there are times when there is definitely a lot more water. January in particular, right after December, it was able to reach over 100. However, let's look at the dry seasons. We see a decline starting from June, and as we get into July, August, September, October, and November, we start getting into 1 and below. Cajamonga Watershed Park in the Arroyo Seco has a particularly important habitat called the coastal sage scrub habitat. Despite the word coastal, this habitat does occur inland as well. And within this habitat, there is about 100 listed sensitive animals that occur in the CCS. CCS is just an abbreviation for coastal sage scrub habitat. 10 to 15% of historical coastal sage scrub habitat remains intact. Very little from what was historically recorded. Coastal sage scrub habitat, particularly the seedlings of those shrubs, so your California sagebrush, your coyote bush, such as those, the seedlings have to compete with exotic grasses. I have a photo here of particularly an aerial view of the spreading basins. We see some of the trees there, but a lot of that dry litter you see there is from exotic grasses that grew there once development started of the spreading basins and has continued annually. The exotic grasses germinate early in the season, and they occupy the same soil region. Because of that, they compete with the seedlings of the shrubs, which means less water and resources for them. Climate change in particular is predicted to increase fire frequency, which favors exotic grasses, and it's feared and predicted that coastal sage scrub habitat will transition into grassland if things don't change or things are not managed or restored. Particular interest to us at the ASF is native fish. And considering the extirpation is regional extinction. So it does not mean the complete extinction of the species, but it means that for the species in California or in a particular area, they're gone. So considering the extirpation of many native fish, we would have liked the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to have stressed the importance. They made several good comments when it came and critiques when it came to this project. We would have loved if they gave us more when it came to fish. We wish they stressed more about their reintroduction into Hucamonga, their habitat restoration, and their preservation. These are several species that do not occur anymore in Hucamonga when they historically did, except for the trout. This includes the Pacific brook lamprey, the Pacific lamprey, the rainbow trout / steelhead, and the arroyo chub. The Anna speckled dace, the Santa Ana sucker, and the unarmored three-spines stickleback. All these above, in exception to the trout, were last recorded 50 years ago in the Arroyo Seco. Diversion and land conversion has reduced the numbers of the rainbow trout and steelhead. Dams landlocked, groundwater pumping, urban runoff, and hatchery fish do not breed well with native fish. So that's made restoration efforts even more difficult. Here's our historical photos of what has been lost from steelhead. This is particularly at the Ventura River at Foster Park. We had some good fish, folks. We'd like to see that again. The historical population of steelhead was in the tens of thousands. Currently, there is less than 1,000 individuals here in California. Steelhead in particular in this area was once a thriving area for the trout who migrated from the San Gabriel Mountains through the Arroyo Seco into the LA River and into the ocean in their migration pattern. Here in this old photo, this is actually what Devil's Gate Dam, before the dam was created. You can actually tell where Devil's Gate Dam got its name from by the little horns right here in this little mountain over there that you can see. There is a concern that many salmonid species will be experiencing extinction, in particularly 13 species or 42% of endemic salmonid species occur in California. There is the prediction that some of these will reach extinction in 50 to 100 years because of the said before reasons, unless restoration efforts are taken more seriously. California Department of Fish and Wildlife has two codes that we particularly want to stress. One is 5937, which requires dams and water facilities to provide enough water for fish to thrive and to survive during critical periods, which is important to us considering that they want to take a lot more water than is available in the dry season. Code 5901 requires fish to be able to go up and downstream. The current draft environmental impact report from Pasadena Water and Power does not provide mitigation for this, and it does not take into account for future climate change, or it does, but very minimally. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife is stressing that the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is taking into the account of particularly climate change. It does cite a study from 2019 on the impacts of climate change in Southern California. There are two particular models. One is that perhaps in the future, between 2070 and 2099, our climate here in Southern California will become about 127% more warm and wetter, but most models say that it's going to be 60% drier. Yes, if it's warm and wetter, there will be greater biomass, greater carbon sink, saturated soils, but because of that, more landslides, but also poor quality treatment. In the dry models, we're talking about the obvious less water quantity, more wildfires, and the possible desertification of Southern California. Here is just a graph particularly of the lack of recharge of groundwater into the actual basins in the different models. If we just look real quickly at the light blue graph, we can see we get into the negatives. The least Vales Vareo, in 1986, a subpopulation was listed as endangered. 300 pairs existed only at that particular time due to the loss of important riparian habitat, which does occur as well through the coastal sagebrush in the Arroyo Seco, as well as parasitism from the cowbird. It is known to occur below Devil's Gate Dam. The Arroyo Seco Canyon Project surveyed this for this particular bird between May 3rd and July 29th and did not find any. The common trees and shrubs associated with this endangered species are mulefat, cottonwoods, and willow, and as well as riparian and upland scrub, all of which occur in the Arroyo Seco and Cajamonga Watershed Park. These species are threatened by the diversion of water. There is a case study, particularly in Idaho, where the diversion of water from Big Lost River resulted in the mortality of cottonwoods within just 5 years of summer diversion. So they took water during the summer months. Within 5 years, those cottonwoods were now deceased. You can see a before and after photo here, particularly of this study. Other species of concern that occur in the Arroyo Seco include the California newt, the Arroyo toad, the California red-leg frog, the California whiptail, the two-striped garter snake, the Southern California legless lizard, the Cooper's hawk, the oak titmouse, the Lawrence goldfish. Here at the Arroyo Seco Foundation, we are asking that a minimum environmental flow for fish and aquatic species be 3 CFS in the spring and no engineered stream material. Our goal here is for restoration of native fish as well as the preservation of its species and the reintroduction of them as well. We would want a living river and a natural stream to allow water to naturally percolate into the ground basin rather than the use of these spreading basins would have caused several problems and issues. As Tim has said before, you can learn more about the Arroyo Seco Foundation, and the Cajamonga Nursery, or you can receive updates via fish@arroyoseco.org. So let the river flow, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angel. Next up is Hugh Bowles, who has been around a long time championing good management in the Arroyo Seco and in Cajamonga.
Okay, good. So thanks. And actually, just going back a little bit, in 2015, I was a co-appellant with the Spirit of the Sage Council when we took the MND through the Board of Zoning Appeals and then ultimately up to City Council. And I'm just going to speak now for 3 minutes about what I think remains one of the key issues that folks can raise in the upcoming meetings, and hopefully it won't just be a meeting in January. So the initial study for the EIR asks if the project is going to impact an aquifer or the recharge of an aquifer. And PWP selected no impact, claiming that diverting more water into the spreading basins is going to improve recharge. And public comment in 2015 and also for the current EIR challenges this claim because science paid for by PWP in 1995, their Converse study, and then by the city in 2003, the Williams study, suggests that exactly the opposite may be true, that the spreading basins are inefficient because they clog, they absorb less than 40 gallons per day per square foot, compared to over 3,400 gallons per day per square foot in the actual stream zone. And the PWP response to this so far has been, we have to use the spreading basins regardless of their efficiency. And then efficiency is not about how quickly you recharge the aquifer. And measuring percolation rates in the stream to them is irrelevant. When asked at the scoping meeting for the EIR in November 2019, how much of the diverted water actually reaches the aquifer, the PWP staff response was, well, we assume it does. They have absolutely failed to provide any science to support their claim that more diversion improves recharge. They use this no impact selection to avoid any comment on this issue. And the EIR buried in the appendix, actually shows that the old JPL parking lot, which is the site for the new basins, is less porous even than the current basins. And PWP cite the Raymond Basin judgment as their defense. But the judgment actually allows pumping credit from flows that are in the natural stream that are leading to a spreading ground. And spreading grounds come in many forms. A seasonal berm in the stream around Johnson Field, for example, would spread water and for 11 months of the year allow all flows to remain in the stream as they would be absorbed well before reaching that area. And so I think the key through this process that we're going to go through over the next few months is to pressure decision makers to ensure that an environmentally superior alternative that is required by CEQA in an EIR, and as part of that, there should be an assessment of the benefits of leaving flows in the stream rather than diverting them to stagnate or evaporate in spreading ponds. I mean, the water quality deteriorates quickly in those ponds once the flows slow. We know PWP are going to scare the decision makers. They're going to say, if you don't do this, if this project is not approved, the city will go short on its water supply. And while building more inefficient spreading ponds will allow PWP to pump more water under the law, in the long term, it could deplete the aquifer and ultimately force the city to rely more on imported water rather than less. And so I think we should be asking PWP to show us your science, because they have not shown it yet. They did not show it in 2015. They have not shown it in the EIR. And I think we need, if we can apply the pressure and get that message to the decision makers, so ultimately when this goes to city council, they can ask these questions. I'm somewhat hopeful that we'll have a different outcome than what we did in 2015. Thanks, that's it.
Thanks very much, Hugh. We'll move directly to Ken Kules, who's a veteran water engineer, worked with the Metropolitan Water District for more than 21 years and with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers before that, doing water resources planning. So he has a lot of experience in this area.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the declining Raymond Basin, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project. Just briefly, there are three sections of the Raymond Basin, the Monk Hill Basin, the Pasadena area, and the Santa Anita subarea. Pasadena only has rights in the Pasadena area and the Monk Hill Basin area. And I show the location of the spreading grounds here. You've probably already seen this. I apologize for missing the first part of the presentation, but this is the decline curve for the Pasadena area. Shows the water conditions there. So you see the judgment was in the original judgment was in 1944, amended judgment in 1955, and there's been a steady and nearly linear decline in the basin since then. The low point was in about 2015. In 2009, the pumpers of the Pasadena area agreed to reduce their pumping by 30% below safe yield. In 2016, we had a wet year, and you see a bump going up there, but you've seen pretty much a flatness in the decline in the last 4, 5, 6 years. But nevertheless, over the period since the original judgment, the basin has declined 250 feet or 3.3 feet per year, which is pretty dramatic, particularly given the fact that a safe yield under the judgment should have arrested the decline and stabilized the groundwater levels. Indeed, Zanjero was hired by Pasadena Water and Power to do a report, and this is this bottom part is a figure from the report. And what they did is they reverse engineered the situation and said, well, what if we were working under the original 1944 judgment, and it shows that there would have been a stability in the basin, some low points, some high points, but basically the basin would have been stabilized. So the message is they got it right in 1944, and the 1955 judgment or amendment that increased the safe yield was wrong-headed, if you will. So let's look at Monk Hill Basin. Similar graph. This shows the groundwater levels in the Monk Hill Basin beginning in 1935. A little bit of history here. The county first put in spreading basins in 1949. The Boehner Water Treatment Plant was built in 1969, and that was taking surface water rights that Pasadena has, 25 CFS, and diverting it for treatment. And if you're not familiar with the Boehner treatment plant, you might have seen it if you're familiar with the Arroyo. It's a industrial looking building halfway up the hill on the east side of the Arroyo, up near the north end of the spreading basins. That's a water treatment plant, and they treated that water for delivery to the system. The judgment was amended in 1974 that gave the ability for Pasadena and other pumpers to earn credits of 80% of water, the surface water that's replenished. So if they replenished 1 acre foot, they would get the ability to pump an additional 0.8 acre feet above their safe yield. Boehner was ultimately closed because of water quality issues having to do with more stringent treatment plant requirements. And shortly after that, in 1968, LA County quit operating the spreading basins, and Pasadena took them over. And since then, it's been operating on a pumping credit basis, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But bottom line is the basin was pretty stable leading up to the change between the county and Pasadena, except for the fact that there was a severe dry period in the early part of the time. But in more recent years, it's been fairly stable. However, pumping was curtailed for the groundwater wells that under the influence of the perchlorate contamination coming from JPL. And what you see is an actual increase in the groundwater levels during that period, with a slight dip for a dry period. Subsequently, beginning in 2011, the pumping resumed because the perchlorate treatment was completed and began, and the drought began, a 5-year drought, severe drought that we had that ended in 2016. But what you see there is relative to the previous low point in the groundwater basin, the groundwater elevation dropped 30 feet. Relative to the time of the judgment, it's dropped 80 feet, which in a smaller basin like Monk Hill is nearly as dramatic as what you see in the Pasadena area. So I talked about the pumping credit programs. Again, if you have a surface water right, you can replenish it and get 80% of the water recharged as pumping credits, and 20% goes to the benefit of the basin. Raymond Basin Management Board has a rule for recharging. If Pasadena, in this case, recharged water that was other than their surface water right, they would get 60% of the water recharged as a pumping credit, with the remainder going to the basin. Prior to, well, the judgment says that anything that the county Department of Public Works spreads goes to benefit the basin in its entirety. There's no pumping credit arrangement, and that continues at Eaton Canyon. However, as I pointed out in the timeline, prior to 1998, the water that Public Works spread went entirely to the benefit of the basin with no pumping credits. But what we have in Monk Hill is a setup where all recharged water results in a pumping credit for Pasadena. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the water system and resources plan. There are 4 projects in that plan that depend on increased diversions from the Arroyo, the first of which being the Arroyo Seco diversion project. But there are several other projects that depend on diverted water. And I want to point out that there are 3 projects that replace wells and have water issues that'll become important to understand later in the presentation. So the Arroyo Seco Canyon project, I'll just briefly describe it. JPL and Hahamugna are off to the west. Diversion dam is up the canyon. And there's something called a Hugh pipeline that brings water from the diversion down to the spreading basins. The existing diversion dam diversion capacity is set at 25 CFS. It's a limiting factor, and that 25 CFS has to do with the fact that once flows exceed 25 CFS, the diversion structure has to be closed because of sediment problems. The diversion structure itself can divert more water, but there'll be a settlement that'll be coming through the pipeline that's problematic. The Hugh pipeline doesn't represent a constraint. However, there is a constraint at the spreading basins of 18 CFS. That's the maximum spreading capacity at the spreading basins. So the Arroyo Seco Canyon project seeks to increase the spreading basin capacity by 7 CFS and overcome the issues having to do with sediment at the diversion and allow the diversion to operate up to 100 CFS. So we can operate when flows are up to 100 CFS, but its maximum diversion is 25 CFS because of the spreading basin limitations. And there'll be a final EIR hearing on January 6th. That'll be the end of the process. And if the hearing officer certifies the EIR on January 6th, the project has got to go. So I'm going to talk here about a scenario. Well, first of all, Pasadena Water and Power has rejected my comments on the project under the declaration that all of the water the additional water that's diverted by the diversion project will otherwise have gone through Devil's Gate Dam. Key factors influencing that are the stream bed infiltration capacity is 6.5 CFS. That's between the JPL bridge and Devil's Gate Dam. The ponding infiltration capacity, and I think Hugh's talked about that before, is 25 to 29 CFS. But an important factor is the Big Dig settlement that was signed in July requires the county to pond water behind Devil's Gate Dam through June of each year. So I show here the diversion structure and the Hume line. The example here is 25 CFS coming down the Arroyo at the dam. 18 CFS is diverted. 7 CFS bypasses the diversion structure. 6.5 CFS of that will infiltrate in the stream bed, and the remainder half CFS will infiltrate in the ponded area because it's less than 25 CFS. Under the proposed, the same scenario, 25 CFS would be coming down, 25 CFS would be diverted. Nothing would get past the diversion dam, and therefore nothing ponds downstream of, nothing infiltrates downstream of the diversion dam. 7 CFS will go into the spreading basins, and 5 CFS will be pumped out as the pumping credit. And on a net in this example, the net basin replenishment will be a negative 5.6 CFS because of the additional extraction that's permitted. So how do I how do I convert this to an assessment of impact on the groundwater basin? So I built a mathematical model that basically takes the kinds of operating assumptions that I just talked about, having to do with water coming down the creek, water spreading naturally, water being diverted. All of these assumptions are built into this. It operates over 30 years from 1990 to 2019, and it uses the USGS gauge flows, daily flows at the Arroyo Seco gauge upstream of the diversion dam. Now this is 11,000, almost 11,000 data points that it analyzes using the type of analysis that I just spoke of. And so here's a graphic representation of what the modeling operations are. You've got Devil's Gate Dam and the Bleak down below. Here's a profile showing the Arroyo Seco stream bed and Devil's Gate Dam. And I have a spreading basin up in the upper left-hand corner. So the low-level drain is shown here. The mid-level drain or the tunnel is shown. And then the spillway elevation is shown in the dam. The county built a grout curtain in 1997 that basically obstructs water from seeping through the foundation of the dam. And then here I show the diversion dam, the Arroyo Seco diversion dam. So I'm going to go through some scenarios here. This initial scenario is water is flowing at either 18 CFS, 25 CFS, existing and proposed, goes to the spreading basin. In the next stage, water goes by the spreading basin or the dam and slowly seeps into the stream bed and doesn't reach the dam. As water increases, the water will reach the dam. And at that point, your infiltration will be 6.5 CFS. Remembering that the settlement agreement, the Big Dig settlement agreement, wouldn't allow any additional water to go out the low level drain. And the grout curtain will stop water from percolating or passing through the foundation. So as water builds up in the ponding area behind the dam, I've used the average of, well, I've used 23 CFS. There's a long explanation I won't go into. I've used 23 CFS. In the next stage, water will start flowing through the tunnel and eventually go over the spillway. Modeling this is next to impossible because it requires reservoir routing. If any of you are familiar with that, that requires knowing how the county is going to operate the dam, what the area capacity curve is behind the dam and the flood hydrograph, all very technical details. Basically, I didn't do that. In the reservoir routing considerations, what you need to understand, it doesn't affect recharge amounts. When I say recharge amounts, I'm talking about recharge in the spreading basins. And then I've used 23 CFS percolation for all ponding. Theoretically, with deeper water, you get more percolation, but basically I've conservatively used 23 CFS even when the water begins flowing out. Operations that went into my numerical model, and here are the results. Under the baseline condition, both the existing and proposed would capture 1,973 acre feet. The ASCP would incrementally spread 1,104 acre feet. And then the percolation behind Devil's Gate Dam in the stream bed and the ponding would be greater for the existing and lower for the proposed. But the net, when you look at the net, there would actually be 331 acre feet increased spreading in the net spreading in both the spreading basins, the stream bed, and the ponding. However, when you match that against the pumping credits that Pasadena will get, you'll see that there's a net reduction in groundwater, and that's approximately 7.4% of the safe yield. So the safe yield will suffer or be harmed by 7.4% of the safe yield through this this exchange, if you will. So what does that mean? If the groundwater levels continue to decline, by the way, that would be groundwater reductions that would be in addition to the already declining groundwater. So what are the implications of reduced groundwater levels? What you can see here is that the red is bad. And this is a map of California that shows the various regions. Pasadena area and the Monk Hill Basin are all in the bad. And what are the implications? There are direct impacts, there are indirect impacts that are dire for the Raymond Basin. And what you see, as I pointed out in the WSRP graphic, is you're already seeing elevated TDS and nitrates in the Pasadena wells, and they're looking to replace 2 wells, probably because of both water quality and problems with water surface or with groundwater elevations. So this is the schedule that they're on for the ASCP DEIR. They've circulated it. They got comments. They made a report to the MSC in October. Related, the WSRP was briefed before the EAC in October, and the EAC has written a letter that I believe is posted on Tim's website, basically calling attention to the need for dealing with the declining groundwater levels. Our little group met with PWP in November. The final EIR responses to comments, which will include the responses to comments, will likely come out by December 23rd, just in time for the holiday. And the EIR hearing is going to be on January 6th. And the final EIR is likely to be certified mid-January, shortly after the 6th, if Pasadena pushes this through. What's worth noting is that the hearing and certification will not be done by the City Council. It'll be done by the hearing officer. Subsequently, the WSRP, which includes the Arroyo Seco project, will go to the MSC on about January 26th and to the City Council on February 8th. The existential questions, is it Pasadena's policy to continuing drawing down the Raymond Basin? If not, what's their plan for healing the basin? And is moving forward with the ASCP under the conditions that we've talked about, is it responsible to stewardship of the groundwater? Those are the questions that I'll be posing to the hearing officer on January 6th. And with that, I'll take questions if you have any.
Ken, this is Hugh Bowles. Thanks for that. Just one clarification. If this, at the November scoping meeting, I did sort of clarify with them what the approval process was going to be. And it looks like it's going to be exactly the same as what it was in 2015. So there's going to be a single hearing officer who effectively approves the EIR. But then what we did in 2015, we appealed that. And then it had to, so the MND was appealed in January. We filed an appeal. It cost, I think, $250 then. And we then went to a full hearing at the Board of Zoning Appeals. It was approved again. And then ultimately we went to City Council. So ultimately it did get to City Council, and critically, Terry Turnick, Mayor Turnick at that time, did actually ask city staff, do spreading basins work? And they came up with a very poor response. So I'm assuming we have those same options, that it's probably likely going to get approved in January. And then we do have the options of filing an appeal, setting a date for Board of Zoning Appeals, and then ultimately City Council. And it actually took 6 months, I think, back in 2015.
Yeah. You're
so
right.
there are other options. You know, it's not the only January 6th or whatever.
Yeah. There are two ways. There are two ways that it can go beyond the zoning appeal officer and the zoning appeals board. And, you know, one is the appeals, such as you did. And, you know, it requires 2 appeals, and we will do those appeals. Right. And secondly, a city council person can call it directly to the council. And so we have, you know, some new city council people now that haven't been there in the past. And I think it would be a very useful thing for people who have contacts with those city council people. And particularly, I would say the council people who are on the Municipal Services Committee. They really should exert authority over this decision. And they've had preliminary discussions that were very superficial with regard to the project and didn't have any presentation on the kind of negatives with regard to the project that we've discussed tonight. It was all happy talk about, you know, maximizing our water rights and things like that, which sounded like really good things to do. So the city council really hasn't heard the story on these issues yet. And the 3 people, they just appointed the new Municipal Services Committee. Andy Wilson is the chair, which I think is good. Felicia Williams was also appointed to the committee. And the third is Tyrone Hampton. And all 3 of them have indicated that they're interested in this topic. They haven't made a commitment to pull it to the city council, which we will ask them to do. But so I don't think, we're not going to see it over by the middle of January. That's what Water and Power wants. That's what they think is going to happen, but it will not happen.
Yeah, I mean, Brad Bowman told me in 2015 after the initial CUP meeting, and I think I was the only commenter, you know, against the project. And he said, well, this would all be boring if it wasn't for you, but we're here now 5 years later. And it's starting to get more interesting. And I think the more people sort of articulate the need to restore the natural flows and that actually is going to benefit the aquifer. I think if we have a gang of people who are prepared to say that, I think City Council in particular will pay some attention.
All right, so if people would like to ask questions, we'll be glad to consider them. There's one question from CB Anthony who asks, is Mr. Cole's model and report available on your website? Yes, it is. Very interesting stuff, but I'm not up to speed and would like to learn about the assumptions. So go to that page, www.arroyoseco.org, and then /watercrisis.htm, and you'll find it there. And if you have any trouble with it, send me an email and we'll make sure that you get the information.
If I could ask Tim, is the interest in having the spreadsheet itself, or would a printout of the spreadsheet results be adequate?
CB Anthony is the questioner. Do you have a response to that?
The printout is 123 pages.
Did you go over? Did you check it carefully? Did you check every line?
Yes, I did.
I know you did. Okay, now we have. Yeah, it is available. As a matter of fact, there's a nice little tight 3-minute video, which is now on that page at the top, which goes through some of the stuff that Ken just did about comparing the 2 different approaches and while it looks like it's going to be helping the groundwater basin, the reality is it's not. It's going to continue the decline in the groundwater basin, and it really isn't of a value. That is not of value to the other pumpers. The other pumpers are going to lose from this kind of program. And that's kind of the game they're playing. They're all doing these kind of weird games and storage things and all of that. And that's why the adjudication effectively, it hasn't really taken effect, is because they're playing games to get around the adjudication. And they're all competing with each other as to who can take the most water while it's still cheap. And, you know, that's a game that is a dead end, you know. It's just going to lead to destruction of the groundwater basin. You know, this is a very big issue in the state of California, but only in the agricultural areas, because the state in 2014 put into practice the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which requires all critically overdrafted basins, except for the adjudicated ones. It requires all critically overdrafted basins to file plans to make them sustainable by the year 2040. Well, you know what? Pasadena and the Raymond Basin had a plan in 1944 that was fully sustainable, but it's ignored it. So it isn't enough just to have a plan. And I hope the state people realize that. I hope the state people realize, one, the adjudication basins are not necessarily better in terms of managing groundwater resources than the other basins in the state of California. And secondly, that you can't trust them even if they have a plan unless there's accountability. And part of the problem with the Raymond Basin program is that there used to be accountability. The State Department of Water Resources used to be the water master and would enforce the plan. But now the pumpers themselves are the referee. They're the water master that determines the adjudication and who gets to pump and whatever. And so you see, there's no accountability as the basin falls and falls and falls until it reaches the bottom. And you know, that's what they say. They say you don't miss your water till the well runs dry. Well, the well is running dry. And the people that are doing it are the pumpers. And they're all competing against each other to take more. It's a sad state. And it's basically a massive hoax that has been played on the citizens of this region with this wonderful, lofty rhetoric about what great environmental leaders we are, when the reality is it's a massive hoax. All right, we have some other questions. When you say pumpers, do you mean PWP and others? Well, pumpers, there's like 16 pumpers in the basin. And they include, let's see, who are some of the pumpers? Pasadena Water and Power is the biggest. It pumps about, it's entitled to take more than 40% of the water. Then Huntington Library, for instance, is a pumper. Arcadia is a pumper. Alhambra is a pumper. Sierra Madre is a pumper. And then there's a bunch of small pumpers, some of them which are kind of private groups that have water rights, ancient water rights that go back, 80 or 100 years. So there's actually 16 pumpers, and there's a board of people, the Raymond Basin Management Board, which meets, every month or so. And those are the pumpers. But they don't all have the same interest. I mean, none of them, if you really look at it, this is a great example of the tragedy of commons. None of them have an interest really individually in draining the basin, but collectively they do, and everybody else is suffering from everybody else's actions here. And it's a disgusting situation, candidly. They've been telling us, for many years, oh, we've got a plan and it's sustainable and it's safe yield. And the reality is it isn't. And they're lying. And future generations are going to have to deal with it. And just like many of the other classic environmental mistakes that we've made, eliminating public transit, moving to cars, massive expansion of freeways, internal combustion engines, on and on and on, Here's one that people in Pasadena are going to be particularly impacted from because they're not going to have this Raymond Basin to fall back on. They're not going to have the cheap water that it's provided up to now. They're not going to have the security of supply if there's a drought or an earthquake or some other situation in which Metropolitan Water District can't provide the water. So someone asks, what can we do if we don't live in Pasadena? Well, everybody can work for good water management. And, the most basic thing that you can do for good water management really is to promote conservation. Conservation is the best way to work for good water management. It's the cheapest way. If a really effective program for conservation, and particularly one that focused on outdoor water use, and let me add, the use of native plants will reduce the amount of water that is necessary to pump out of the basin. So, you know, single family houses in Southern California, you know, typically use 50% of their water outdoors. And this is the largest area of potential savings. But for that to occur, there really needs to be a transformation in landscaping so that people begin to realize the natural beauty that we're surrounded with by the natural plants that have been here in our region for millions of years and that have adapted well to the climatic conditions here, you know, rather than, you know, big flowery plants that are typical of English gardens. So, you know, everybody, many of the other cities around are part of the Raymond Basin as well. So there's ways that you can find out, try to get a handle on your water company. Who are they? Most of them are municipally run. They're run by cities. There's a few that are private, but most are municipally run. 80% are municipally run. Does PWB have a program to encourage rain barrels or cisterns at single-family residences? Yes, they do. And as a matter of fact, we're going to have some rain barrels installed at Haumungna Native Plant Nursery. And we're going to start providing rain barrels to people by working together with Pasadena Water and Power Department. So we hope to work with Pasadena to expand dramatically their conservation programs, including such things as rain barrels and native plant landscaping and, you know, some things that can really make a difference in terms of how people use water. And if you really look at the pattern, if you look at the historical pattern in the last 20 or 30 years, people are using less water than they used 20 or 30 years ago. And the basic reason for it is because the appliances are more efficient and the toilets are better. And, you know, there used to be toilets that were 7.5 gallons and they now got them down to 0.8 gallons per flush. And President Trump doesn't like it, but they work, and they work very well. And they've conserved an amazing amount of water. And so all across the country, as a matter of fact, water consumption per capita is down. But it's a pattern that we need to continue and expand on in the future, particularly with the irregularities that we're seeing from climate change. Does Glendale Water Power take water from the basin? No, they don't. I don't think they're a pumper. Glendale does have a municipal water and power department like Pasadena, Glendale Public Services, I think they call it. And they have the same kind of services, and so does Burbank. But they are, they're actually a member of the, they're a member agency of the Metropolitan Water District. Both Glendale and Burbank are, as well as Pasadena. So, you know, this is an area that, you know, Metropolitan Water District ought to be concerned about. Somebody says, CB Anthony, hi CB, says, Tim, when I search to get hits, I find that you were involved with the Metropolitan Water District for many years. Yes, as a matter of fact, I represented the city of Pasadena for 28 years on the board of directors of the Metropolitan Water District. And I was the chairman, thank you for asking. I was the chairman of the Metropolitan Water District from 2006 to 2010. And that's what makes this program and Pasadena's lack of stewardship with regard to water resources so painful to me, is because I worked for 28 years trying to get storage programs and conservation programs that would actually benefit the Raymond Basin and the other groundwater basins in Southern California. But unfortunately, most of those programs, some of the conservation programs have moved ahead, and Metropolitan has been subsidizing, you know, xeriscape landscaping and things like that. But a lot of the important stuff with regard to the better management of groundwater basins has not moved ahead. As a matter of fact, all throughout Southern California, I bet, I don't know, I can't say for sure because I haven't seen recent data, but I know that from 10 years ago, the basins kind of operate together. So if Pasadena is having trouble in falling groundwater basins, groundwater levels rather, most of the other groundwater basins in Southern California probably are as well. And I think it's kind of one of these things where it's kind of a hidden problem. And, you know, the decisions are made, you know, the decisions about water policy are basically made by city councils for municipalities. And the city council looks at it and says, well, that groundwater is pretty cheap. You know, and nobody's telling them what the long-term consequences of continuing to drain the groundwater basin are. You know, I kind of think a groundwater basin is like a refrigerator. You know, you can't just keep going to the refrigerator and taking food out if you don't put food in. You know, the food isn't going to be there when you need it if you don't put food in regularly into your refrigerator. Everybody knows that. Well, groundwater basins are like that too. If you don't let them replenish by natural means, if you exceed what's going in there by the natural replenishment, rainfall and stream flow, then there's not going to be any water there in the future. And all of the problems that Ken talked about, you know, which are great. You're going to lose wells, you're going to have water quality problems, you're going to lose emergency backup. You know, there's just an awful lot of problems that are associated with losing an invaluable resource that is currently providing 35% of local water. But, you know, Pasadena has a long-term water program that they have outlined, which is available for you to review, and we've got information on it if you want. And basically, the Arroyo Seco Canyon project is only one of the projects that they're doing that will further drain the Raymond Basin. And the language, if you read the study, it sounds good because they say, oh, you know what? We're going to stabilize. We're going to restore the Raymond Basin as a water source so that instead of only getting 35% of our water from them, we're going to set as a goal to take 50% of the water from the Raymond Basin. But they don't say how they're going to get more water into the basin so that they can use it. You know, it's really an incredibly contradictory and frankly irresponsible program to tell people, oh, we're just going to pump more groundwater. That's basically what they're saying. We're just going to pump more groundwater, and we're not going to let it replenish. It's a terrible situation, and it's something that citizens really need to get worked up about. And it's hard for people to understand the complexity of water issues, but in many ways, it's probably the most real important environmental problem that affects people. And when we talk about the effects of climate change in the future, water will be the medium that causes most of the problems for people in the future with regard to climate change. Water and energy. And, you know, people focus more on energy, but water is going to be extremely important. Everything from rising sea level, you know, to more floods, longer droughts, all sorts of incredible problems. All of the water sources that we relied upon during a period of time that was actually kind of a historical anomaly and produced more water than the historical record. And that is the period basically from, say, 1900 to 1970 or so. It really was a fairly wet period. And so a lot of decisions were made about water policy during that period of time, which aren't working out. You know, the Colorado River doesn't have as much water on it, in it, as we gave away in the Colorado River Compact in 1922. There just isn't that much water there. And the same, there's you know, intractable problems with regard to, you know, the State Water Project, and the arguments continue to go on about what to do about the Bay Delta program and all of that. You know, the water situation, you know, was based on a lot of promises, lofty promises and highfalutin language, happy talk, a lot of happy talk. Everybody's saying, oh, this is going to work. And then they don't go back. Like, for instance, the adjudication of the Raymond Basin. Boy, that was a big step forward in terms of better managing groundwater resources. Was it? No, it was just a lie. It was a deceitful lie that water managers ought to be held responsible for. We got some more questions. Do we write to the Pasadena Council members about being opposed to the draining? Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really kind of the simple, there's a couple of simple things we need to come out of this. One is a commitment that they're not going to continue draining down the Raymond Basin, that they're going to stabilize the basin and work to raise the level, to replenish the basin again, just like the farmers in the Central Valley have to do. You know, why should Pasadena, you know, we can't justify going all around the Southwest taking water from Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, Montana, Northern California, if we're not managing our own water resources well? We can't do it. We lack all credibility to do so. And that's part of the problem with the State Water Project, is because people in Northern California perceive that Southern California isn't managing groundwater and other water issues well. Well, they don't notice about groundwater because, you know, we haven't told them, but that's the reality. Anyway, yeah, I'll talk to the city council people about it for sure. And it's a big issue. Let us know what they say. All of the city council people that we've talked to recently, and we have talked to, you know, briefly to Tyrone Hampton and Felicia Williams and Andy Wilson, they all have expressed concern about it. But they need to hear from more people than us. Because what happens is the water and power department people go in there and say, well, you know, we're the experts. We know better, you know. But they're not. They're not. They're not well informed. They're not responsible planners for the future. They're neglecting future generations is what they're doing.
Well, I think the key is, Tim, too, is that they have not provided any science to back up the approach that they...
That's right.
And there are scientific studies that PWP have paid for and the city have paid for that suggest that restoring flows to the natural stream would improve the recharge of the aquifer. PWP don't want to hear about it, but they have produced no science of their own to say that diverting more water into spreading ponds is going to improve the recharge of the aquifer. It allows them to go and claim extra pumping credit. That water then sits in these ponds that have been shown to be highly inefficient as mechanisms for recharge.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right, Hugh. You know, and they're going to go to the city council and they're going to say, you know, this program is good for Pasadena because it's going to allow us to exercise our full water rights. But what they don't say is, and that means we're going to drain down the basin. We're going to continue to drain down the basin. You know, they don't have 100 years more to drain down this basin. They probably don't have 20 years more to drain down the basin. We can say that if the programs that are contained in their long-term water resources plan are implemented, it is the death knell for the Raymond Basin.
Yeah, and the judgment states that you can divert water into spreading grounds for percolation into the underground. They have not been able to show that putting more water into their spreading grounds is actually going to percolate into the underground, because the evidence seems to suggest that that is not what happens.
Yeah. Well, I think Ken's analysis is rigorous. You know, I mean, I've looked at a lot of water planning over the years, and I think Ken has really done an outstanding job of definitively making the case that while this might seem like it's good for Pasadena, it's not good for the Raymond Basin. And ultimately, what's good for the Raymond Basin is good for Pasadena and vice versa, or should be.
Yeah, the challenge there, Ken, is if you're incorporating the dam into the overall strategy, PWP just go berserk over that, because they're saying the county control the dam, we can't control how much water is held behind the dam, and they are not a party to the agreement. That has been the standard PWP line on this for years. So if you're going to include the dam as part of an overall strategy, which the Williams study certainly recommends that you do, and even the Converse study says, you know, the groundwater goes up by orders of magnitude if water is held for short periods behind the dam. So that's just the warning on that front. As soon as you sort of start to bring the dam into the picture, PWP just explode.
Well, thank you, Hugh.
If I can offer,
Tim, I know you want to say something here. Go.
Yeah, I think what's worth understanding is my approach here has been to assert that there is harm to the Raymond Basin. And if there is harm, and I've used their assumptions, I haven't used anything that I think they'll disagree with. And if you use those assumptions and come up with this harm assessment, they're required under CEQA to identify that as a significant adverse impact and that's not mitigable, and that they would have to adopt findings of overriding considerations under CEQA. That's been my approach here. And in that process, they'll have to, first of all, admit that there's a harm, and that secondly, that the harm is acceptable. And in essence saying, yeah, we're going to drain down the groundwater basin until the cows come home.
Well, I think you're right, Ken. They really do need to, if they're going to do it, they need to list this as an unmitigatable impact, and the city council needs to vote to do it. If they're going to kill the Raymond Basin, they need to vote to do it. And we need to make sure that the council votes to do it. And so it'll be very interesting on Christmas Eve when we get our copy of the final environmental impact report. You know, we can go through it and see whether they list this as an unmitigatable impact. What do you want to bet? What do you want to bet?
They're not going to, because they've already said in the initial study where there's a specific question is, will the project have an impact on the recharge of an aquifer? I'm not sure what the exact language is, but it applies to any project and any aquifer for a lead agent. They have expressly stated no impact. And because they have stated no impact, they have completely sidestepped any challenges to that statement. And Ken, I think Ken's analysis there, with enough people paying attention to that, I think it says, that I've tried to say it, but that statement is a lie. That's them saying there is no impact to the aquifer, and then claiming that we put more water.
They also said there's no fish in the mountains. That's a pretty shocking statement, really, if you go back and look at the history. If there's no fish now, why are there no fish? And why are they not looking for them when they might actually find them? It's an incredibly irresponsible document, the draft environmental impact report. I've seen, it's a very shoddy. The firms that participated in that program really should be ashamed of themselves for their shoddy work, but it also illustrates how poor environmental law in fact is and what little restraints there are. I mean, for instance, the fact that a hearing officer, a zoning appeals officer, can approve the environmental impact report, which is what Pasadena Water and Power, they think that's the case. They think the hearing officer can just say, okay, that's it, it's all over. Well, wait a minute. CEQA says the lead agency is supposed to approve it, but the fact that they can delegate it to kind of a mid-level administrative functionary without any real public input, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous and irresponsible. And it's irresponsible of the city council to put a system in place like that. They need to take responsibility for what they're doing and not foisted off on a hearing officer, a low-level hearing officer that, only comes to town twice a year. All right, well, listen, we're going late here, and everybody's hanging in there. What a great crowd you are. I mean, listen to us rant. But we're so glad that you joined us this evening, and please stay in touch with us as these things develop, because they're going to happen quick. They're going to try to slide this thing through real quick. And, I'll tell you, if you look at the big picture, the 25-year program that the Pasadena Water and Power Department lays out is a $425 million program, which will basically increase local utility bills, local water bills, by $250 million above the level that they're at now. So they're going to invest an enormous amount of money in fixing old pipes and doing stuff like that, and very little money in conservation and in better management of the Raymond Basin. So we hope that you'll stay in touch with us and get involved and come to the hearings and make a difference, because, water is such an important and often neglected issue. Thanks for joining us this evening, and with that, we'll close the meeting. Good night now. Thanks, Angel, Ken, Hugh.
Thanks.